Tim, could anybody draw up a table of relativities in age groups from different countries so that 6 to 8 in Australia equals 8 to 12 in Japan or vice versa? I mean, is it possible to, or is that constantly changing as well?
I think one possibly could do that, but then you've got the other angle, which is it's not just my perception of what a 6 to 8 year old in Japan thinks, but the broadcaster gatekeeper's perception. And it's very interesting to me. You mentioned Japan. Very often shows that are made in the West for kids are actually most popular with young adult women in Japan. So, do you know what I'm saying? You've got sometimes some very extreme differences in where the audience is going to sit. And when you go to Japan and you look at what who's buying merchandise for what are primarily preschooly shows in the West, can often be a 22-year-old office worker from Osaka.
Which brings up the question of two issues. One is setting a budget for an appropriate budget for the project, and secondly, included in that, the potential for merchandising and how that is handled both by you as producer or executive producer and by the broadcaster. In other words, what's the impact of the potential of merchandising?
Yes. The budgets I find will primarily depend on, number one, the animation medium you're going to use, whether you're going CGI or 2D, for example. Secondly, it will depend on the number of co-producers involved, how many producer fees and legal fees are being involved in making this. And thirdly, it will depend on your choice of country to co-produce with or not. In an ideal way, and by the way, can I say, nobody in their right mind wants to co-produce, frankly, because you're adding a layer of problem as well as adding advantages in financing. But and so my preference would always be to be working primarily out of Australia with maybe a servicing studio elsewhere. But needs must, and that will, and your choice of how you go there will have a great impact. In regard to merchandising, I personally am very doubtful of the value of including merchandising projections in my projections of returns on a property. It's actually very difficult for any producer to say with any confidence that a show is going to be a merchandising hit or not. Of course, merchandising hits tend to come primarily in the preschool area. I mean, I acknowledge that shows like SpongeBob SquarePants do go broader, but the majority of significant merchandising is in that preschool area. And frankly, it's an area that I avoid. And the reason I avoid it is that the merchandising attraction brings in some very heavy players. You've got BBC Worldwide, you've got Hit Entertainment, you've got major companies in America producing for preschool, and they can afford to play in that play pit because they've got deep enough pockets to wait for merchandising to hit. And because the broadcasters know that, the broadcasters don't pay as much for these types of shows as they do for other types. And indeed, they expect to be cut in on the merchandising as well. So that the preschool arena has become increasingly the playground of the larger corporations. I find, as an independent producer here in this country, where our budgets are limited and where you've got to get a return out of the broadcast license fees, that making shows above preschool age is a better way to go. That said, while I was at Yoram Gross, we had some tremendous results in merchandising from Blinky Bill. However, I would also say that we started that process in the early to mid-90s more than 10 years ago, and the market has become a great deal harder since then. And I'm not sure how easy it would be today to have achieved the same success as we did then.